All right, well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us for Koha Community Gifted. In this part of our series, we talk about ways that librarians and staff can give back to their fellow partners and share ideas about what they're doing. Today, we have Emily joining us to talk a little bit about Cron Jobs and how you can use them at your library and work with them throughout the Koha community. My name is Jessie Zarrow, and with me is Kelly McElligott. We will both be monitoring the questions in chat as we go along. And with that, we're going to transfer to Emily. Welcome, Emily. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be part of the Koha Community GiftED series. Let me get my screen shared. Most fun part of every webinar. So I'm Emily Lamancusa. I'm an IT specialist at Montgomery County Public Libraries in Maryland. We've been on Koha since 2021, supported by Bywater. And as Jessie said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the cron job tools options in Koha, and a little bit of an overview of what those are and a deep dive of how you can use those and dig into the information to really customize your setup for your library and how you want your system to work. So first of all, if you have not heard this terminology, what is a cron job before? A cron job is basically a script that you set up to run at a certain interval. So you could set it up to run daily, weekly, monthly. You could set it up to run on May 22nd at 1:17 p.m. every year, every 15 minutes. You really have a lot of granularity of how often you want that to run. So some common cron jobs that a lot of libraries use include, if you want to have automatic renewals, you might run a cron job daily to identify the items that are due to renew and automatically renew those. You might use a cron job to send notices from Koha. By default, that's set up to run once an hour. We actually customized ours to run more often, every 15 minutes, to send those notices out. You might want to automatically handle patron accounts that are due to expire, which is set up to run monthly by default. But again, you could change that to run weekly or every 6 months or yearly, whatever it is you want. And one that we really make a lot of use of is there is a cron job to automatically run a report, a saved report from the reports module in Koha. And it will compile that output and email it out to an email address of whoever you specify. So we use this one a lot to take data about our collection, data about our circulation, sometimes just monitoring the state of the system so that if something comes up later, we can go back and say, okay, how long ago did this data start looking funny? When did this break? So those are just a few examples of the wide range of cron jobs that Koha has available. So your first stop, if you have a problem and you want to see if there is a cron job that you can use to solve that problem, would be to go to the Koha manual. There is a cron job section in the manual that lists out all of the cron jobs that Koha has available. And it goes into a lot of detail about what options are available with those cron jobs and how they work. So most cron jobs do have somewhere between 3 and maybe 10 to 15 different options that you can specify when you set them up to fine tune their behavior of exactly how they're going to work and what they're going to do in your system. In the manual, these are called parameters. They may also be called flags. So if you frequent Bugzilla, you might hear people talking about them as flags on bugs. So for example, here is an excerpt from the manual section for the process message queue cron job that sends out those Koha notices. So as you can see, it has a bunch of parameters available. There's actually more than would fit on my slide. But these are the first like 6 that it has available. So it does allow you to specify a username and a password if you want to send from a different email address than what your system is configured to do by default. You can specify if you only want it to send email notices or if you only want it to send text message notices if your system is set up to send both, but you don't want to send both all the time. You could specify which type of notice you want to send. And you can also specify a specific letter code. So if you want to have one separate run of process message queue that only sends your overdue notices, for example, you have that option as well. And I kind of alluded to this, but one thing that's really helpful to know that might not be obvious is you actually can run multiple copies of a cron job if you want to set up different flags and have it behave in different ways at different times. So you're not just limited to one process message queue. You can actually set up as many copies as you want. So in our system, we do have 2 different copies of process message queue set up because from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., we only want to send email notices. We have a lot of cron jobs that are running overnight that are generating notices. So we want to get those out of the way and sent and out of the system before we open. But nobody wants to receive a 7 a.m. text message. So we have 1 copy of the message queue cron job running just from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. that will only send emails. And then the rest of the day, we have a separate copy that will send all types of notices, emails and text messages. So this is actually what our cron job setup looks like for that. That early morning one, we specified that T option for type and say only send email type notices. And then the rest of the day, we just didn't specify any options. We just let it run with its default behavior and send everything according to all of the notices that we have set up in our system. There are some cron jobs that don't have as much detail in the Koha manual, just because the standards for documenting have changed over time. So some of them weren't documented as well or weren't documented there in the first place, and someone just hasn't gone in and updated them yet. So if you run across one that doesn't have its options listed out in the Koha manual, another place you can check is you can actually go to pearldoc.kohacommunity.org. This is another place it may be documented. Not all of them are documented here either, but is another helpful place to check. So for example, the long overdue cron is one that is not as thoroughly documented in the manual. But what the manual will tell you is it will tell you the script path. So that little top portion is a screenshot from the manual. So in order to check if pearldoc.kohacommunity.org has that, what you can do is you can type in that first part of the address and then put a slash and then copy paste the script path from the manual into your browser URL to complete the URL. And then instead of ending with .pl, it would end with .html. So if that comes up, then that might be another way to get information. But again, it won't come up for every script. Finally, shameless plug, if you find one that is not well documented in the manual, I do encourage you, if you have a Bugzilla account or if you have a support provider, to report that missing part in the manual so that you can bring it to somebody's attention and they can add that information in for your benefit and for the benefit of all the other libraries using Koha who might want to learn more about that cron job. Okay, so let's say you've identified your problem, you found a cron job with some options that you're pretty sure will do what you want it to do. Can you test it? And the answer is usually yes. So if you do have access to a test system, either you're lucky enough to have a test server or you have even just like a test Koha dev box or whatever. That's the easiest way to test it, is just run that cron job with those options on that test system and double check that it does what you want. But if you're not lucky enough to have a test system, you do have other options. So many of the cron jobs have a confirm option, which basically confirms that, yes, you want to make these changes to your system. So if you run a cron job that has a confirm option and you don't add that confirm option, it will do a test run and it won't actually change your system. As a note, be really careful to make sure that you're sure that the cron job does actually have a confirm option before you do this, because not all of them do. And if it doesn't have a confirm option in the first place, it will just always run for real. So do be careful that you are actually doing a test run when you think you are. Another option that many of the cron jobs have that can go hand in hand with the confirm option is the verbose option. And what that does is, whether you're doing a test run or a real run, it will give you a lot more information about exactly what that cron job did in that particular run. So for example, there is a delete items cron job, which will automatically clean up old items on your system based on whatever other options you've specified. If you run that with the verbose option, it will repeat back to you what options you specified. So if you save it for later, you'll be able to go back and see what exact options did I choose. And it will also list all of the items that are deleted. Or if you're doing a test run, all of the items that would be deleted. If you run the delete items cron without the verbose option, it basically won't give you any information. It will just run and then say, done, finished. And it won't tell you which items it actually deleted. So a verbose option is probably something you will want to turn on if you're doing a test run. And it's useful to have on for the real runs too, because then you can go back and double check what your cron did. If you are unsupported, you or your system administrator will be able to set these options directly. If you are supported library, this is something that you would ask for in a ticket with your support provider. If you want to have that, certainty beyond what you're sure about and what your support provider is able to tell you. Finally, once you have your cron jobs set up, there are also ways in the system that you can monitor what they've been doing over time, and double check and see if they're running correctly and what exactly you have going on. So that verbose option from the last slide is one option, depending on your setup. Starting in version 22.11, if you have the system preference enabled, oh, what? My slides are in the wrong order. Sorry about that. So many cron jobs will log themselves to the action logs report if you have the system preference for that turned on. There we go. And that's the cron job log system preference. So in order to see those logs from the action logs, you would go to the tools module and open up the log viewer. In the module section, you would want to select only cron jobs and unselect everything else. And then if you want to check up on a specific cron job, you would type in either the whole name of the cron job or part of the name of the cron job in the info field to filter down to that exact cron job. You may also want to put in a date range to narrow it down, either so that you can find what you're looking for if you're looking for a specific time frame, or just to help the report load faster if you have a lot of cron jobs going on. And once you put in all those options, if it's a cron job that has been logging, you can see at the bottom of my slide an example of what those action log lines will look like. So looking at those, you can check what time your cron job ran, what time it finished. You can see what options it ran with. and you can check whether or not it did finish. So what you see in my example is one run of the process message queue that was only sending email types. You have at the bottom, because it goes from most recent to least recent, the bottom one shows that it started at 7 o'clock. And the top run shows that it actually completed at 7:11. So that might be useful if you suspect one of your cron jobs is misbehaving. We actually did catch a bug at one point where something was crashing our holds queue cron job, with lots of debugging back and forth. But one of the things that helped us figure that out and monitor when it was fixed was that you would see an entry that the holds queue started, and then you would never see an entry to say that it completed. So that was a clue to us that something went wrong and the cron job crashed and never actually finished doing what it was supposed to do. Starting in version 22.11, another option you have in the action logs is that if you have your system preferences enabled in your system to log different types of actions, you can actually check up on the action logs from those actions to tell whether an action was done by a cron job, whether it was done through the intranet by a staff member, whether it was done through the OPAC, etc. So again, here's an example of what a modify catalog action might look like that was done by a cron job. I think this particular one was in the shelf to cart cron job. So someone checked an item in, it was set as reshelving for a day, just as a signal that it might not actually be back on the shelf yet. And then the cart to shelf cron job goes in after 24 hours and changes that item back to available. So you can see that this action was a catalog modify action because it was modifying an item. And then all the way on the right, you can see the interface column says cron job. So we know that was performed by a cron job. And under the object column, it says which item was actually modified. If you look at this on your system, you will get more information, but I edited that out because I did take that from our live server and didn't want to share actual data. If you see an action and you're kind of like still wondering how exactly that happened, maybe something shouldn't have happened, you can actually find out which cron job it was that took the action, just not from the action logs viewer tool yet. I'm sure someone will build that in eventually. So in this case, you would need to use a custom SQL report, most likely from the reports module. If you're unsupported, your system administrator could do that through the command line if they really want to, but the reports module is, a safe, accessible way to do it without having to dig into the system. So the easiest way to do that would be to use a query something like this. I'm not going to go deep into how a query works, but plug to my predecessor who did the last Koha connected model on SQL reports. That's recorded, so go back and watch that if you want to learn more. It was awesome. But basically what this does is it selects everything from the action logs where the action logs happened on whatever date you specified. You do have to write out the date exactly the way I did in my example. So 4-digit year dash 2-digit month dash 2-digit day, all in single quotes. Otherwise the system will not find it. And the object equals whatever you got from the object column in that action logs report when you ran it from the tools action logs module. So if it's an item, it would be the item number. If it's a change to a biblio record, but not a specific item, it would be the biblio number. If you have an item, put in the item, or it might be the borrower number, a patron, or whatever. So if I wanted to find out which cron job actually ran in my example screenshot from above, for the timestamp, I would put 2024-05-21. And then down in that object, I would look back up to the object column where it says item 2625689. I would just put in 2625689 as that object. So then it will, if a whole bunch of things happened in the same minute, it might pull up more than one action log line. But it should have it narrowed down pretty well so that you can figure out which is the one that you're going for. Finally, this was a pretty broad overview, and it's going to take a lot more digging to fine tune, exactly what's available and how you want to make it work for your system. There's, I think, 30 or 40 different cron jobs available with a ton of different options. So there's no way that could all be covered in one webinar. So some next steps, if you want some more information about fine-tuning a cron job to solve a particular problem, I'd suggest either going to the Koha mailing list. They recently started up a chat community in Mattermost, which is pretty similar to Slack, which is a really great resource because there's a lot of different libraries and a lot of different developers and support companies all collected in Mattermost. So if you have a question or want more information about something, and especially if you're unsupported and can't ask and don't have a vendor to ask, that's a really great resource because there's tons of people there, mostly at all times of day and all time zones throughout the world. So you have a very high chance of getting a good answer to your question if you go there. Another option is the Koha US Slack channel, which is run by Koha US, but with the goal of including the Koha community at large. So if you are watching this not from the US, you still could go in and request membership access to the Koha community, Koha US Slack channel.
All right, Emily, this has been fantastic. Just like a very good general overview of how cron jobs work. And of course, most importantly, some excellent community resources. Thank you so much. Are there any questions from our listeners that you would like to ask Emily, or questions about cron jobs in general? Okay, well, this concludes our second Koha Community Gifted. Thank you, Emily, so much for being a part of this series.
Thank you again for having me.
This was awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you for everyone who came.
Absolutely. Oh, we do have a question. Go ahead, Kelly.
We do have a question that says, do we request, if we're hosted by Bywater, do we request cron jobs to be created, or do we just create them? So you will submit a ticket through the ticketing system and ask to request your cron job, and we'd be happy to work with you, let you know those parameters, and just have a general conversation on like your needs, like frequency, all the things that Emily covered, because as Emily, alluded to, every library is different on how they're going to run these processes. So definitely open a ticket and we'll get that started for you.
Wonderful. And don't forget, for our next series, we will have the basics of systems administration with Laurel Moran from San Diego Law Library. So we hope you can join us for the next one.
Thanks. Have a great day.